In 1992, three of us slipped through a hole in the earth just wide enough to believe we'd come back the same. But the thing about caves, they don't always let go. And by the time they found me, a month had passed. The others never came home. The official report was sealed. The route we took vanished. But I still remember what I heard down there. And I know something else was listening too. Before I go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if stories like this ever brushed up against your childhood or your hometown, go ahead and tap that like and subscribe. Every click helps pull another forgotten name back into the light. My name's Caleb Warren. I was 15 when it happened, just a quiet kid living with my grandma on the east side of Bowling Green, Kentucky. My parents died in a wreck when I was 12, and after that it was just me and Grandma Ruth. She worked long shifts at the diner, kept me fed, and made sure my school shoes didn't fall apart. I spent a lot of time on my own, mostly reading books about explorers and treasure maps, caves especially. I couldn't get enough of them. I think they made me feel like there was still something big out there I could understand if I just studied hard enough. My two best friends back then were Eli Barnes and Noah Reyes. Eli was the kind of guy who could sweet-talk a vending machine into giving you extra change. He had this wild red hair and that fearless streak some boys get when they grow up with just enough rules to know how to break them right. Noah had just moved in the year before, came from California with his family. His dad taught at the university. Noah was the smart one. Always scribbling in his little notebook, always asking questions the rest of us never thought to ask. We weren't troublemakers, not really. But we had a shared obsession: caves. We'd explored every sinkhole, rock cut, and overgrown trail in a 5-mile radius. We knew which formations could be climbed, which ones would get your jeans ripped, and which hollows weren't worth the crawl. But Mammoth Cave, that was different. That was the Holy Grail. There were stories, old ones, about unmarked entrances and unmapped tunnels. Some kid had left a dog-eared magazine in the school library, and Eli found it. Said it showed a side path near the main system, something supposedly closed off after a couple of injuries back in the 80s. That's when we got the idea. Not to do anything dumb, just to go in a little ways, just to see what most people never do. It felt innocent, like we were stepping into a story. The air that October had a weight to it, cold, sharp around the edges even when the sun was out. The leaves turned early that year, real bold reds and burnt golds, and for the first time it felt like we were racing against something we couldn't name. Noah started double-checking our gear lists. I kept reading up on survival tips. Eli, he just grinned more. Said if we didn't do it now, we'd never do it. Tuesday, October 27th. That was the day. School let out early for teacher meetings, and we told our folks what they needed to hear: library study sessions, sleepovers, whatever fit the bill. The plan was simple: a few hours underground, back by dinner. We weren't running away. We weren't doing anything dangerous, we thought. By noon that day, everything still felt normal. Then around 1:30 p.m., Grandma called the school. She'd forgotten I'd said I was staying late. Wanted to tell me not to forget my jacket, it was getting colder and rain might be coming in. But I never picked up, and when they checked the library, I wasn't there. The call came in just after 4. I didn't know it at the time, Grandma told me later, but she'd phoned the school to remind me to bring a jacket. The weather had turned that day gray and wet, and she knew I had a habit of forgetting things when I was excited. The secretary said I'd already left. Said school let out early and the buses were gone. But I hadn't come home and I wasn't answering the house line. By 5:30 she'd called Noah's parents. They hadn't seen him either. Eli's folks thought he was at my place for a project. That's when the first pieces of the lie started to come apart. The plan had seemed solid earlier that morning. Eli kept his gear in his locker, ropes, flashlights, some snacks, and we met behind the bike racks like we always did. Noah had copied out part of the cave system from an old geology article, and I'd gone over the path one more time, double-checking the turns we were supposed to make. The three of us rode out fast, keeping to side roads and cutting through back trails. It took nearly an hour to reach the spot. You wouldn't find it unless you were looking. A narrow seam between two rock faces half covered by brush and a rusty old sign that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. Eli went first. He always did. I followed, trying not to think about how tight the opening was, and Noah came last, pushing his pack ahead of him because it wouldn't fit across his shoulders. By the time we were all inside, it was nearly 4. We were standing in a little chamber just big enough to stand upright, the walls dripping and close. Our headlamps cast shifting circles of light on the stone, and for a moment we were just grinning at each other. We'd made it. We were in. The air felt damp and old, and the ground underfoot had a cold, pulpy crunch like soaked leaves trapped in rock. We followed a narrow corridor that sloped gently downward, marking our way with strips of orange tape tied every 50 feet or so. I was in charge of the markers. Eli led us deeper. At one point, the path forked into 3, and we stood there arguing for a while. Noah liked the center trail. It seemed to rise slightly and might have led to a secondary chamber. I thought the left path looked safer, wider, more stable. Eli pointed toward the right, said it was probably the least traveled, and that was exactly the point. And like always, we followed him. The path narrowed again, sloping unevenly and forcing us to crouch. In places, the limestone gave way to polished pockets, carved by years of underground water flow. It was beautiful in a strange, quiet way. We stopped at one point in a small chamber where stalactites hung in rows above our heads. Noah made sketches. I remember thinking I'd never seen anything that quiet. Not just silent, dead quiet. It's hard to explain until you've been that deep underground. You can hear your own heartbeat. Every boot scuff echoes like it belongs to someone else. That's probably why the footsteps stood out, just a few at first. Soft, slow, dragging. Eli held up a hand and we all went still. You learn fast that underground sound is slippery. It bends around corners, bounces off wet stone. But this didn't sound like a trick of the cave. It sounded like someone coming toward us. For a moment, we thought it might be a ranger, someone checking the closed sections. Or another group, maybe older kids. But something felt off. The rhythm wasn't right. It stuttered, dragged. Almost like whoever it was couldn't walk properly. We turned off our lights and waited. The dark was absolute. Even with our backs to the wall, it felt like something might brush against us at any moment. The sound came closer, then faded, then circled back again from another direction. We didn't speak, just stared into the dark and listened. Eventually, Eli whispered that we should check it out. He figured if someone was hurt, we'd want to know. We moved slowly, our lights flicking back on. The path narrowed further, and the ceiling dropped so low we had to crawl in places. 10 minutes deeper, we found another fork. This time, we picked the straight path drawn by the last direction of the sound. The walls began to change less raw limestone, more smoothed out with strange markings scraped into the surface. Symbols, scratches, nothing that made sense. Some of it looked almost intentional, but faded. Noah tried to sketch one. I wanted to turn back. I said we were too far in, that we'd already been underground for over an hour, that it was getting late. But Eli said we were close to something. You could see it in his face, he really believed it. That's when we heard it. A scream. Not the kind you can mistake. Not a cave sound, not a bat, not some trick of the echo. A scream raw and stretched, not quite human but not animal either. It started loud and ended in this horrible wet kind of moaning. Then silence again. Complete. We froze, all three of us, heads turning like animals who'd just realized they weren't alone in the woods. I think it was Noah who finally said it. Someone might be hurt. Someone might need help. We couldn't leave, so we didn't. We pushed on. The air got thick. The stone turned slick, and then the path narrowed into this choke point where we had to go one at a time. Eli slipped through first, sidestepping along a ledge where the rock dropped away into nothing. He called out that it was only about 6 feet just tight. I went next. Halfway through, I heard that sound again. Breathing. Not mine. Not my friend's. Someone was in there with us. I stopped. And in that moment, everything shifted. A grinding noise, stone on stone. Then impact. Pain. Heat. And black. I was pinned. Couldn't move. Couldn't call out for more than a few seconds without running out of air. The rock had dropped clean from above, trapping my neck and shoulder flat against the cave floor. I could still feel my legs. I could still hear the Eli on one side, Noah on the other, both shouting, scrambling to move the stone. They couldn't reach me. I remember the panic in Noah's voice, the way Eli kept cursing under his breath, trying not to lose it. I told them to go. I didn't want to, but I told them they had to. It was getting late. We had no signal, no way out. They left me with extra batteries, a flashlight, and half a bottle of water. Promised they'd be back in a couple of hours with help, with gear, with everything I'd need. I said I'd be okay. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I said it. And then the lights started to fade and their voices got quieter. I listened to their footsteps as long as I could. I never heard them come back. Not that night. Not for a long, long time. I lost track of time almost immediately. My watch had been knocked sideways when the rock came down and I couldn't lift my arm far enough to read it anyway. The flashlight Eli left was still working, but I turned it off after the first hour to save power. In the dark, it was easier to pretend the cave wasn't closing in on me. I focused on my breathing, slow, shallow, through my nose, trying not to panic every time the weight shifted against my ribs. I told myself they'd be back soon. Maybe they were already on their way halfway down the tunnels with grown-ups and rescue gear and lights bright enough to peel the shadows off the walls. That hope held steady for a while. Then it started to drift. I don't know when I realized how much time had passed. Maybe it was when the cold started to settle under my skin like it belonged there. Maybe it was when I reached for the water bottle and found it already empty. But at some point I started calling out again, not loud, just enough to make sure I was still real. I kept my fingers moving. To keep circulation going, sure, but also to remind myself I could. If I stopped feeling my arms or legs, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to keep thinking clearly. I remember the sound of a drip somewhere behind me. Just one. Same interval. Same rhythm. That drip was the only way I marked time for a while. Meanwhile, up top, things were starting to come undone. I didn't know it, but Grandma Ruth had gone door to door that night. Called every parent she could think of, then the school board, then the park service. At first, no one believed her. School let out early all the time. Teenagers forgot to call. But she knew I wouldn't just disappear without saying anything. Eli's dad didn't take it seriously until almost 9. By then, Noah's parents were already at the ranger station, showing the desk clerk a copy of the article we'd used to plan our route. It had Noah's handwriting in the margins. Notes, measurements. He was methodical like that. That's what convinced the guard they weren't just panicked parents. The man radioed his supervisor. Less than an hour later, a cave rescue team was being assembled, but that was only the beginning of the problem. Eli and Noah had made it back to the surface, but not with a clear path. They'd gotten turned around during the exit, missed some of the tape I'd tied off, taken at least 2 wrong turns trying to find daylight. Once they were out, they couldn't reverse it. They tried. They really did. The first responders followed them back to the entrance around 10:30 that night, and all of them went in together. But the deeper they went, the more confusing it got. Every tunnel looked like the last one. Every chamber echoed the same way. At some point, they found one of the stalactite rooms and thought they were close. Then the markings disappeared. Then the temperature dropped again. Eventually, the rescue captain made the call to pull back until daylight. Eli was pacing the parking lot by then, hands in his hair, cursing under his breath. Noah sat on the tailgate of someone's truck, clutching his notebook, whispering page numbers to himself. Neither of them could remember which fork we'd taken. They both said we'd gone right then left, then maybe straight. None of it matched. That was the beginning of the questions. By morning, the official search had started. Local news ran headlines, 3 boys missing in closed section of Mammoth Cave. Then it changed. 2 boys found third, still trapped. Then came the criticism. How did they get in? Why weren't the entrances sealed? Was it a prank? A dare? A runaway attempt? I was 15, but people talked like I was a grown man who should have known better. The more attention the story got, the more people tried to make sense of it. And when people don't understand something, they look for someone to blame. For Noah, it turned inward. He stopped talking to reporters, started redrawing the tunnel diagrams again and again, filling in blank spaces with details he swore were missing the first time. Symbols, arrows, room shapes that didn't match official maps. He was trying to find me with memory alone. Eli shut down in a different way. He kept repeating one thing to every person who asked. He told us to go. He told us to leave. And I had. But that didn't make it easier. Grandma stayed at the ranger station every day. She brought thermoses of coffee and blankets for the search teams. She sat near the trailhead with a little transistor radio and just waited. People offered to drive her home. She wouldn't go. She told them she could still feel me down there. Said she'd know if I was gone. I think that made some of them uncomfortable, that kind of certainty. I can't say what I would have thought if I'd been on the other side of it. After the 3rd day, the tone shifted. Park Service issued a statement that survival after 72 hours in those conditions was unlikely. The cave air stays just above freezing. With no food, no water, and no insulation, it doesn't take long for the body to start shutting down. But Grandma didn't back down. Eli and Noah started walking the perimeter of the cave entrance, retracing every trailhead, every map, every hand-drawn note. Some of the volunteers joined them. Others said it was time to accept the truth. I didn't know any of that at the time. I only knew I was still breathing. I'd stopped crying sometime that second night, more out of exhaustion than anything else. I don't remember dreaming. I do remember the light. When I finally turned the flashlight back on to check my legs, the beam stuttered once, then held. And I saw something at the far edge of the light's reach. Something small, leaning against the stone. A folded scrap of cloth. I blinked. Thought maybe I'd imagined it. But when I reached forward with my good hand, I felt it soft dry and tucked around something hard. A piece of bread. And next to it a tin cup half full of water. I didn't hear anyone come. I didn't hear anyone leave. But someone had been there. And they knew exactly where I was. I didn't eat the bread right away. I just stared at it, not sure what I was seeing. It was wrapped in part of what looked like an old undershirt, torn and folded with care, not crumpled or dropped. The edges were clean. The tin cup beside it held water that didn't taste like runoff or seepage. Cold, clear, no mineral bite. I took small sips, trying not to drink it all in one go, even though every part of my body ached for it. My mouth had been dry for what felt like days. After a few minutes, I reached out for the bread and took a bite. It was dense, slightly sweet, and soft in the middle. Not packaged. Not anything you'd carry in for a day hike. Someone had made it. Fresh. I remember the sound it made when I chewed, like the cave itself had gone quieter just to let me hear it. After that, I waited. I kept the flashlight on low, facing away from my eyes. My neck still couldn't move much. I'd tried to lift my shoulder once earlier that day. At least I think it was still the same day, and the pain nearly knocked me out. But now I was wide awake, listening, watching. I expected to hear movement, breathing, a scuff of boots on stone. But the dark around me stayed still. And yet, someone had been here, knew where I was, had left me enough food and water to survive just a little longer. That changed things. I started counting the hours again, not by light or sound, but by how often I felt the air shift slightly near the floor, or how dry my throat became before another drink would appear. It wasn't constant. Sometimes half a day passed. Other times it felt like I'd blinked and something new had been left for me. Nuts dried fruit once, what I think was cheese wrapped in wax paper. Always in reach, never enough to waste, never more than I needed. I never saw a face, not once. Sometimes I thought I could hear a footfall, just a single one far off before it stopped. A few times I whispered out a thank you or just asked, "Who are you? Please tell me who you are." But nothing ever came back. No reply. No voice. Just careful silence. And then they'd be gone again. Above ground, the story was unraveling in ways I couldn't imagine. On the 6th day, national media picked up the disappearance. News vans parked along the edge of the Ranger Road. Aerial crews came in. Journalists wandered through local stores trying to find people who knew me, Eli, or Noah. Some neighbors said they'd always known we were that kind of kid, the type to go poking where we didn't belong. Others remembered me as quiet, polite, always carrying a book. Grandma Ruth didn't speak to any of them. She sat by the cave entrance with a folding chair and a thermos of black coffee and told anyone who got close, "He's not gone. He's just not back yet." Eli's dad got interviewed outside the park headquarters. He tried to keep his voice steady, but the clip they aired caught him saying, "They left him." That's what happened. It didn't matter that Eli and Noah had led the rescue team in multiple times, that they kept trying to redraw the map from memory, that Noah barely spoke to anyone except to point out new passages he thought didn't match official surveys. People still started pointing fingers, and some of those fingers turned inward. Eli stopped showing up to the ranger station by the 2nd week. His mom said he'd been having nightmares, locked himself in his room, told her he didn't want to be anywhere near the cave again. Noah stayed, but something changed in him. He grew quieter, his drawings darker, less structured. He started making lists, patterns, cross-referencing sounds and distances with diagrams no one else could follow. One of the search leaders, a man named Tom Jeffers, former military, asked to have him removed from the search group after Noah claimed he heard tapping sounds in the stone. Said it was Morse code. Said it was me. Jeffers thought it was trauma, grief, stress. The park's official report, when it finally came out later that winter, said the rescue operation had covered more than 70% of the accessible tunnels in the area we were believed to have entered. But accessible was the word that kept coming up. A few areas had been marked unstable, collapsed. Some sections had shifted since the 1980s and weren't safe even for experienced teams. Every day that passed, fewer volunteers showed up. Then came Halloween. Day 5. A group from western Kentucky, retired spelunkers, all of them, joined the effort. That night they camped near the trailhead. Around 2 a.m, one of them radioed the command post. Said he heard someone singing. Not clearly, just the rise and fall of a tune like humming from a tunnel that should have been sealed. They investigated, of course, sent a team down at first light. Nothing was found. No footprints, no sound. But something kept the story alive. Something kept certain people from walking away. And back in the dark, I started feeling a change I couldn't explain. My thoughts were harder to hold on to. Memories blended together. I would drift between full awareness and something else, something like dreaming with my eyes open. At one point, I thought I heard my dad's voice. He'd been gone for 3 years by then, but there he was, calling my name from the hallway of our old house. I remember whispering, "I'm here," and believing that maybe I was. When I came back fully, the food had been replenished. I don't know how many days passed like that. But eventually I realized the water was starting to taste different. Not bad, just cleaner, less cave-sourced, almost filtered, like it had been brought from outside. That meant someone had found a way in, past the blockages, past the search crews, past the shifting rock. Whoever it was, they weren't just surviving in the cave. They were moving through it freely. And they didn't want to be seen. I don't know when I stopped being scared of the dark. Maybe it was sometime after the 7th or 8th visit when I finally stopped waiting to see the person and just started accepting the rhythm of their silence. Nothing was ever left in a hurry. The placement of food and water was deliberate, patient. If my flashlight had been pointed the other way, I think they still would have moved without making a sound. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't feel footsteps, just the small shift in air pressure you only notice when everything else has been still for too long. I started keeping track in my own way. Not with dates or hours. I had no real sense of those anymore, but with changes. The water stopped tasting like cave runoff and started tasting clean. One time, the bread was wrapped in a napkin instead of cloth. That detail stuck with me. The napkin was blue and printed with something faint. I pressed it flat against my chest where I could see it in the light. It had a white sunburst pattern in the corner and the words "Welcome Center" just barely visible in the crease. That was the first clue I had that whatever was helping me wasn't just moving through the cave. They had access to the surface, or at least something near it, and they were bringing things in. Meanwhile, above ground, the rescue teams had reached a kind of gridlock. The early maps had failed them. Eli and Noah couldn't agree on the fork we'd taken after the stalactite chamber. The path I remembered crawling through didn't match anything in the official records, and one of the deeper corridors, the one I thought we'd passed just before the collapse, had been blocked by a rockfall that happened days after the search began. No one knew if that passage had ever been clear, or if we'd somehow gone around it through something uncharted. Every new piece of information led to 3 more that contradicted it. By the 3rd week, even the most experienced cavers were starting to say it out loud: the system didn't behave the way it should. Some described tunnels they thought they'd mapped, suddenly narrowing into impassable crevices. Others said they'd come through a path one direction only to find it completely altered when they turned back. Lights failed. Radios flickered with bursts of static. One ranger claimed he heard the faint sound of a boy crying, but it echoed too far off the walls to follow. The volunteers kept at it. There was this guy named Virgil Pate, a retired hydrologist who had spent years modeling underground water flow beneath Kentucky. He joined the search during week 4 and started marking mineral deposits by color to try and track fresh air movement. On his 3rd trip in, he found a patch of orange tape just like the kind I'd used tied around a rock formation inside a tunnel no one remembered entering. The rock face next to it had faint etchings, not carved, just scraped enough to catch the light at an angle. 4 slanted lines, then a break, then one more. 5 total. I never made that mark, and neither did Eli or Noah. But someone had. The team took photos, filed a report, and kept moving. Back underground, I was still pinned. I'd tried shifting position a few more times, always with the same result: blinding pressure across my upper ribs and collarbone, followed by a wave of nausea that left me dizzy for hours. But my legs had feeling. My right hand had just enough range to reach the supplies left at the edge of the beam. It's what kept me sane. That, and the sounds. By the 5th week, I started hearing things again. Sometimes it was voices, but not clear, not directed at me. Just far-off murmurs that rose and faded like wind in a mine shaft. Once I heard a radio. Not the music or voices, just that high-pitched tone radios make when they're adjusting frequencies. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then gone. Another time I heard boots on stone. Not near me, not coming toward me. Just pacing. Careful, purposeful, like someone was watching from a higher ledge and didn't want to be seen. I never called out during those moments. I think I knew better. Whoever brought me food had a different rhythm. That sound, the boots, felt like something else. On what I now believe was day 30, I woke to find something new beside the usual bundle. It was a photograph, tucked under the corner of the cloth, folded so only the top half showed. I pulled it free and stared at it under my flashlight. It was a picture of a cave chamber, large and shadowed but clearly man-made. There were planks stacked along one wall. A tin lamp rusted. What looked like a child's shoe half buried in dust. The photo was old. Color faded to brown at the edges, the kind of curl you see in attic boxes or shoebox albums from the 70s. On the back, written in pencil, was a single line, "You're almost out west." I didn't know what it meant. Not then. But it felt like a message. Not just about where I was, but about what came next. A direction. A path. A reminder that someone, whoever had kept me alive for 4 weeks in a sealed-off stretch of Mammoth Cave, wanted me to know they hadn't stopped watching. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the first. The photo stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That old faded picture of the cave chamber with the planks stacked and the rusted lamp and the shoe half buried in the dust. The words on the back, "You're almost out west," kept playing in my mind, each word more insistent than the last. At first I thought it was just a clue, something to push me into believing that I wasn't entirely alone. But the more I turned it over, the less sense it made. Who had left it for me? Who had been so careful to hide it under the cloth just within reach? I had my suspicions. In the days that followed, I found myself looking at the cave differently. Not just the physical tunnels, the endless maze I was trapped in, but the deeper parts of it, those dark corners that felt like they weren't mapped at all. I started to ask myself if I was still where I thought I was, or if something had shifted. In the silence, the only thing that felt real was the photo, and that strange, hollow feeling that someone was watching. It wasn't the usual sense of being stuck. It was something different, something older. It was like the cave itself had been watching for longer than I had been. I started marking days again, not by the usual methods, not by any sense of time, but by the sounds, the way the air changed, the shifting temperatures. The nights felt colder, deeper. And as the air thickened, I couldn't help but think of the story, the one about the hidden passageways and the tunnels that weren't supposed to be there. The one about the people who lived under the earth. I couldn't shake it. By the time I found the last piece of food, I knew things had escalated. I was beginning to see more evidence that wasn't mine. Not just the photo, but small things. A scrap of cloth, a half-used piece of soap, a strange bundle of twigs tied together. I hadn't asked for any of this. I didn't want it. But in some part of me, I started to realize that someone was making sure I had what I needed to survive. But that didn't explain the sounds I kept hearing, or the things I kept seeing out of the corner of my eye. Shadows that moved where no light should have been. Figures that seemed almost human but always just out of view. I spent a night, maybe 2, sitting in the dark, listening. Just listening. I don't know what I thought would happen. Maybe I thought I would hear someone speak or see someone come through the darkness. But nothing came. Nothing except the steady rhythm of my breath and the occasional drip of water somewhere deep in the cave's heart. That was when I first realized that something else was in the cave with me. I don't know how long it had been there. It was as if the cave itself was somehow aware of my presence. I started hearing the same things over and over, scratching, shifting footsteps that never quite matched the shape of mine. And every time it happened, I couldn't help but think of the photo of the strange writing on the back. That same feeling of being watched. One night, maybe it was the 10th or 11th day, I thought I saw a shadow moving across the wall in front of me. It was brief, barely there, but I knew it wasn't just a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. It was something else. It didn't help that the supplies kept showing up. I tried to push them away at first, thinking maybe it was a mistake. But each time I turned them down, they came back, left in the same place as if the person or thing leaving them knew exactly where I would be. And each time I thought, "Who are you?" but I never asked aloud. The idea of an answer scared me more than the silence. It wasn't long before I started asking questions that I hadn't before. Not just about the bread or the strange scraps of fabric, but about the cave itself, about the tunnels that led nowhere, about the empty chambers I passed in the dark where the air smelled stale and the walls felt different, like they hadn't been explored in a long time, or like they were waiting for someone, for something, for me. I never told Eli or Noah any of this. They never came back. They never even tried to reach me. Maybe that was something I had expected some part of me thought they would. But after a week, I knew they weren't coming. After 2 weeks, I understood they couldn't. They had lost their way, just like everyone else. The cave was keeping them out, keeping everyone out, except me. And whoever, whatever, was keeping me alive. I don't know what I expected when the voices started. I thought it was a hallucination at first. Maybe it was the darkness playing tricks. But there was no mistaking the way the voice was so clear. It wasn't speaking to me, not directly, but I could hear it in the air just faintly, almost like an echo. And then it was gone. At least that's what I thought. But the next night, it was there again. Louder this time. Clearer. More distinct. I could almost make out words, but they were still too soft to catch fully. I knew it wasn't a person. It wasn't like the sound of Eli or Noah. It was something deeper, something in the bones of the cave itself. It felt like a warning, like I had stepped into something far bigger than I understood. And still the supplies came. I stopped eating them at first, but after a while I couldn't help it. I had no choice. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something else, something I couldn't name. The connection to the outside world, maybe, or to whatever was still watching, still waiting. But after that, the silence started to feel different. It was as if the whole cave had become aware of me. Or maybe it always had been. Either way, I wasn't alone anymore, not in the way I thought. And somewhere deep in the darkness, something was listening. I think I knew it wasn't over the moment I saw the light. Not daylight, something else. A dim, unnatural glow that flickered just ahead in the tunnel like a lantern left burning too long or something electrical struggling to hold on. I didn't move toward it at first. I just stood there watching it pulse against the cave wall. After so many days in the dark, you'd think I'd run to it. But that wasn't the kind of light that made you feel safe. It made you feel watched. And the longer I stared, the more I was certain it was never meant for me. The air was different, too. It had that brittle, stale weight that tells you something hasn't been disturbed in a long time. And beneath it, something else. A faint, metallic scent like old copper. I didn't call out. I didn't want to hear my voice echo in that space. Instead, I moved slow, keeping to the wall, counting each step. When I reached the corner, I paused. The glow was coming from a side tunnel I hadn't seen before. It dipped low, then curved into shadow. And right at the bend on the ground was something I hadn't expected. A backpack. Worn down and mud-streaked, but unmistakably real. It had the faded initials NC stitched into the back panel. I dropped to my knees. I didn't touch it at first, just looked. The zipper was partially open. Inside, I could make out a water bottle, 2 granola wrappers, a pen, and a torn notebook cover. I leaned closer. There was something written on the flap of the notebook in thick black marker, half smudged, but still legible. This isn't Mammoth. Don't follow the marks. That hit me harder than anything else so far. I kept thinking about the red arrows Noah had been following, the ones we'd assumed were trail markers or survey signs. But they weren't. Whoever left this pack and that warning had followed them too, and it hadn't brought them out. I sat with the backpack a long time. It had weight to it, not just physically, but in the way it felt like a message. Someone had made it this far and wanted others to stop. I ran my hand along the seam and felt something taped to the inside, a key. Tiny brass, probably to a padlock. It was zip-tied to a loop in the fabric with a small white tag. Written on it were 3 words cramped and shaky. West Chamber. Locker. I didn't know what it meant, but I tucked it into my shirt and zipped the backpack closed. I left it where I found it. The next few hours blurred together. I don't remember how many turns I took or how long I walked, but the tunnels started to change. The walls weren't natural anymore. They were reinforced man-made. Some were lined with brick. Others had rotted beams and rusted wires trailing across the ceiling. It looked like an old mining extension, or maybe an early access route sealed off decades ago. At one point, I passed a metal panel half detached with the number 47 spray-painted in red. Beneath it was a grate that had been pried open, leading into what looked like a crawl space or vent. That's when I saw the shoe. Just one, wedged against the far wall of the grate. It was small, smaller than mine, and covered in dust. I couldn't explain it, but I felt sure it belonged to someone who had been there a long time. Maybe a kid, or someone who had come through looking for help. I stared at it for a while, trying to piece together who they'd been and why they'd never come back out. Then I moved on. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The air felt thinner, almost pressed in. Eventually, I hit a fork in the path. One side sloped down into wet rock, the other curved up toward what looked like the remnants of a steel doorframe. Something told me to take the upper path. Maybe it was the key. Maybe it was the fact that I could smell something faint old wood, maybe oil. The hallway opened into a square chamber. Brick walls, an uneven floor, and at the far end a row of dented storage lockers. Most were sealed shut, rusted through the hinges, but one number 12 had a broken latch. The lock was still there, but the door hung slightly ajar. I pulled it open with both hands. Inside was a folded gray tarp, a pair of gloves, a flashlight without batteries, and beneath them all, a map, hand-drawn, fragile and yellowed but clear. It didn't match any official layout I'd seen. This one had extra tunnels markings in pencil and one section in particular circled over and over in red W. Chamber. Right above it, someone had written, "They don't want to be found. But they always come back here." I remember standing there staring at that note, feeling the weight of everything I didn't understand. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what comeback meant. But I believed it. I believed whoever had written that had seen something they couldn't walk away from. I didn't take the map. I left it right where it was. I did, however, take one thing from the bottom of the locker, a photo. It was cracked down the middle and grainy with age, but the scene was unmistakable. 4 people, standing at the entrance to a cave. 3 of them looked like college students. The 4th one, I swear it was Eli. He looked younger. Not by much, but enough to raise questions. His hair was longer, his face rounder. But it was him. In his hand was a lantern, just like the one from the photo I'd found earlier. On the back of this one, someone had written, "Field Study 2009. Only one came back. That changed everything. I didn't know what Eli had told the others or why he'd come on this trip pretending it was his first. But something about that photo told me we hadn't been the first group down here. And maybe we wouldn't be the last. I left the locker behind, but I didn't head back down. Not yet. I needed to see what else had been kept from us. And something deep in the cave, something older than all of us, was waiting. It was only once I turned back toward the main tunnel that I heard the breathing. Slow, steady, not far from where I'd just come. I froze and listened. It wasn't animal. It had rhythm, a weight to it, like someone waiting in the dark, calm enough not to speak, but close enough to know I was there. I didn't call out. I just waited. A long moment passed, Then the sound shifted one step, deliberate, not fast. Then silence. I backed away without looking. My boots didn't echo on the ground anymore. The walls had changed again, tighter, more narrow, and the damp had started creeping in. My light flickered once, then steadied. I walked faster until I hit a left turn I hadn't noticed before. It looked familiar, but not in a good way. The same half-collapsed wooden frame, the same soot stains near the ceiling, and beside it a long drag mark in the dirt. Whatever had been pulled through hadn't fought. No scuff marks, no blood. Just a quiet absence, like it had given up moving on its own. I kept walking. The tunnels forked again, and eventually I started to see signs that others had been there. A shoe print with a broken tread, a rusted metal clip like the kind used for hauling rope, a scrap of red nylon, and then a voice. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper drawn out like wind through a grate. But it called my name. Twice. Then silence. The first time I thought maybe it had been the echo of my own thoughts. But the second time I knew. It was Maddie's voice, clear and low, just saying my name like she'd said it 100 times before. I followed it. I didn't even think. I just followed through 2 more turns down a slight incline until the walls suddenly opened into something wider. A chamber. Large, square, old. There were collapsed crates, scattered tools, some kind of shelving along the far wall. It looked like it might have been a storage area long ago, maybe even a temporary rest site for cavers. But what stopped me was what was in the center. A pile of clothing, 4 sets, laid out side by side like someone had undressed 4 people and folded everything just once. Maddie's jacket was there. I recognized the pink seam she'd stitched herself after it ripped in Colorado. Eli's flashlight was beside a small notebook. Noah's water bottle still duct-taped with his name in permanent marker. And next to that, Carson's gloves, the ones he always wore with the little rip in the right thumb. They weren't scattered. They were arranged. There was no dust on them, no mold. Someone had placed them recently. My stomach sank in a way I can't explain. The feeling wasn't grief, not exactly. It was closer to trespassing, like I'd walked into a room where someone had already mourned the dead and I wasn't supposed to see it. I knelt beside the pile and reached for Maddie's jacket, but just as my fingers touched the fabric, I heard another noise, a soft exhale. This time it came from behind the shelving. I turned the light slowly, and there he was, Eli, sitting on the ground, knees up, arms limp at his sides. His eyes were open but unfocused. I said his name once, then again, louder. He didn't flinch. His mouth moved slightly like he was mouthing something, but no sound came out. I crossed the room and knelt in front of him. His skin was pale and damp. His pupils barely reacted to the light. I reached for his wrist. Pulse weak, but there. I shook him once, gently. He blinked and finally looked at me. But what he said next, I'll never forget. You're not supposed to be here. That's all. Just that. I asked where the others were. I asked if he was hurt. He didn't answer either question. Just kept blinking like light was confusing to him. I helped him to his feet, slow and steady. He stumbled once, but didn't resist. As we moved back toward the tunnel, he stopped. He turned to look over his shoulder and whispered something. I leaned closer to hear. "Don't bring it out," he said. "It doesn't stay quiet out there." Then he clamped his mouth shut like he'd said too much. We walked in silence. I didn't know if we were heading the right way. I just retraced every turn I remembered. At one point I saw that same locker hallway from earlier, only now there was a faint humming in the walls. Not electrical. More like resonance, like when you hold your ear to old metal piping. Eli heard it too. He winced and whispered, "That's how it listens." I didn't ask what it was. I didn't want to know. It took nearly an hour, but eventually the rock shifted again. The dampness faded. The air felt thinner. And then we saw it faint, but there a wedge of daylight, barely a sliver filtering down from what looked like a surface shaft. I almost couldn't believe it. Eli didn't react. He just stared, then said softly, "It never lets all of us leave." I helped him up the slope and we made it through. When I finally stepped out into the open, I had to blink against the sun. The entrance was nearly invisible from the outside, just a tangle of brush and stone. We were at least 2 miles west of where we'd entered, maybe more. I turned back once just to look. The brush didn't move. No sound came out. But I could feel it, the same stillness, the same pressure I'd felt in the deeper chambers. Like whatever had made those tunnels was still aware and still waiting. Eli wouldn't speak the rest of the way back to the ranger station. He walked with me, but it was like he wasn't fully there. When we finally reached the trailhead, he sat down on a bench and stared at the gravel. And then he said almost too quietly to hear, "The others weren't lost. They were chosen." I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. But in his hands, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A photo, folded, water-stained. I reached out, and he let me take it. When I opened it, my chest tightened. It was that same cave mouth again. Only this time, 5 people stood at the entrance. 4 I didn't recognize, and 1 who looked just like Eli. Same face, same stance. But the photo was dated 2009. In the corner, faint pencil. We followed the red arrows. Only he came back. I didn't know what to do with that. All I knew was this something had been happening in those tunnels for longer than any of us understood. And Eli had never been honest about how deep he'd already gone. Eli stayed under observation for 2 days. Medically, there was nothing wrong with him, no head trauma, no dehydration, no signs of exposure. But something in him had shifted. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it wasn't about the others. It was about light, or the absence of it. He said he kept seeing shadows that didn't cast from anything hearing movement behind him, even when he was alone. The psychologist who evaluated him called it dissociative trauma response, and maybe that's all it was. But when I asked him directly what happened down there where Maddie was, if she'd made it out, he just said, "They always think it's one place, but it isn't." That was the last time we spoke. The recovery teams combed the tunnel system again, but they didn't find anything new. No bodies, no fresh evidence, no signs that Maddie, Noah, or Carson had ever been there, except for the things I'd seen with my own eyes. Their belongings were taken in for evidence, but even that felt hollow. You can hold a jacket in your hands, but it doesn't tell you who wore it last. After a week, the formal search ended. Families were notified, statements collected, reports filed. But none of it felt like closure. It felt like the cave had swallowed them and given back only what it wanted. I stayed in Kentucky for a few more days after that. I kept thinking maybe Eli would say something more, or maybe something else would appear at the cave entrance, one last clue, one last chance to rewrite how this ended. But nothing came. The cave stayed silent, and eventually I had to leave it that way. I think about Maddie more than I'd admit out loud. She was the kind of person who filled up a room without trying. Her laugh always came a beat too early, like she already knew the joke. And Carson, he had this way of making everyone feel steadier, like if he was calm, then you could be too. Noah was younger but sharper than any of us gave him credit for, and Eli, well, I still don't know how much of him came back, or if he ever left that place entirely. There's something I've learned in the time since. Not all disappearances are about getting lost. Some are about being taken, not in the way the news would describe it, not by people necessarily, but by places, by histories that run deeper than we understand. I don't know if what happened in those tunnels will ever make sense. I don't know if it should. But I do know this: some part of those 4 is still down there. Maybe not their bodies, but their stories, their choices, the path they followed. And that's something I carry whether I want to or not. If you've listened this far, thank you. Stories like this don't end clean, but remembering them, saying the names, sharing what truth we can, that's how they stay real. So if this story stayed with you, consider leaving a comment. Tell me where you're listening from, or just say their names aloud. Maddie, Carson, Noah, Eli. Let them echo somewhere outside the dark.